Hi there, welcome back to Dad's Explaining Politics. It's Frederica and Mark Phibbs back with you again. We're excited to this episode talk mainly about Greenland. We're going to start focusing on one issue at a time so we really, get our thoughts and opinions and all the facts and figures out to you guys so you have a good understanding of what's going on in the world right now. Um, do you want to go?
Shall I kick off? This is a big topic. The World Economic Forum has kicked off in Davos in Switzerland, the usual gathering of corporate heavyweights and the who's who of the corporate and government world leaders, but it's being dominated this year by the discussions of Greenland. Trump and his entourage are about to arrive in Davos with much expectation, because just bringing those who aren't up to speed, I'm not sure how you couldn't be given the dominance of this in the news, but Trump and America want Greenland. They say that's important for their national security. They want to fundamentally own Greenland. And as Mark Carney said in a speech yesterday at Davos, this is a rupture of the world order. And so it's going to be very interesting over the next day or so what occurs here, whether Europe finds its strength to push back and not just sort of accept this bullying by the US. And so it will be very interesting.
Yeah, definitely. So let's lay into the history of all of this, right? There's been a situation with Greenland for a long time. They haven't had their own autonomy because they're the largest island in the world. They're technically in the continent of North America, but they've always had relations over their history with Denmark and I think Norway as well at times. So they've historically had that type of connection. The indigenous people are the Inuits, and they have been fighting for a really long time to, establish recognition of their right to rule and their right to have sovereignty in Greenland themselves. But as the current situation stands, Greenland is, territory. It's within the Kingdom of Denmark. So, they have their own prime minister, but their head of state is King Frederick of Denmark. So that remains the case right now at this point. It's kind of like you could say Australia is to the UK what Greenland is to Denmark at this point in time. And obviously, for a long time, people have known that Greenland has a lot of minerals deposits. It also has oil and gas deposits that haven't been used yet. So a lot of powers have looked into that. A lot of independent private companies have looked into how they can get those deposits and use them, obviously make a lot of money. Greenland, I think, has banned a few of these practices due to environmental reasons. And generally, it's just become very difficult for these primarily US companies to go into Greenland and take oil and gas where they want to. So it's always been quite difficult for them. Now the turn of events has been that Donald Trump has decided he wants Greenland and he wants sovereignty over it. Whether that's because he wants access to those oil mineral deposits, whether it's because the trade routes that will be the shipping lanes that will be opened up, because as climate change continues, the ice caps will continue to melt, and the specific geopolitical area that Greenland is in means that once that ice melts, there will be whole new shipping lanes to go north of Greenland and around regions that were never able to be used before. So now we're going to see what happens with that. And maybe that's the reason Trump's looking for it. Maybe he just wants to enlarge America more than he ever has before. Maybe he thinks of himself as an imperial power. We don't know at this point in time, but he's decided he wants it. And like a spoiled kid who gets told no to getting a new toy, he's decided that no matter what anyone says, he's just going to take it for himself. So that's kind of the update right now.
And great summary, Freddie. And so there's only 57,000 people on Greenland, as it's part of the Kingdom of Denmark. And so Denmark provides much of the funding for Greenland at the moment. Of course, there's already a US base on Greenland, and they actually had more bases before, and they've pulled back. So they have full rights to put as many military people as they want on Greenland. That's why I agree with Freddie in a sense. This is an ego play by Donald Trump, part of his legacy to expand America. You think about Venezuela just recently, and this is part of that. And he's talking about making Canada the next state of America. It's all about his ego and his legacy, in a sense, from my perspective, because it's sort of illogical in a way and bullying Europe. And so the implication of this is pretty dramatic, though, because Greenland is part of NATO, as being part of Denmark. And so if the US were to attack Greenland, that would be the end of NATO as we know it. And this NATO is the thing that's kept Europe um, avoiding war for the last 80 years or so. So, it's pretty dramatic, this whole scenario. And, the European approach so far has been trying to appease Donald Trump, right? He puts tariffs on, they don't respond, et cetera, because the challenge is Europe is so dependent upon the US from a military point of view, i.e. Ukraine in terms of their intelligence, et cetera. Just think about cloud-based applications that everyone uses from Microsoft and other companies. These are all US-based companies. So Europe is very dependent upon US tech and US military intelligence. And so they've really been reticent to call the US out and say, we don't agree and we're not going along with this so far. The big question will be, what will be their response to this? Because someone like the US saying, we don't respect your sovereignty, should be a line in the sand.
Yeah, of course. I also think I would reframe what you're saying. I think that almost the framing of what you say, I don't think you mean it intentionally, but it's almost the perspective that Donald Trump comes across as thinking that Europe is so dependent on America. It's not that Europe is so dependent on America, it's that America and Europe are interdependent and
Yes,
they
true.
rely on each other and they rely on a reciprocal relationship where they work together to achieve greater things and to achieve higher economic growth, etc. So none of them is like a parasitic force taking from the other. It's a symbiotic relationship, and that is what is being damaged in this process. So obviously, at this point in time, it's incredibly unprecedented. This is the furthest I think Donald Trump has ever come to crossing that line of international law. Although at this point in time, he's disregarded a lot of it, he's exited a lot of international organizations, but directly disrespecting another kingdom's sovereignty is another thing, and treating it as a real estate transaction, it speaks to his experience as a real estate mogul rather than his ability to be an effective American leader.
So there's two strategies here Europe can take. There's several things happening soon. The midterm elections and the Supreme Court review of tariffs. The Supreme Court could rule in coming weeks that tariffs are illegal and Trump doesn't have the power to do it. That's one hope of Europe. The other hope is the midterms, the Republicans lose control of the House. Okay, because there's a lot of people in the House, both Republicans and Democrats, who are very uncomfortable with this whole concept of taking over Greenland. So there's that scenario. But in a sense, the Europeans, I think, are at a point where they've also got to talk tough with Trump. Now, I think the US leadership disagrees with what you say, Freddie. They're the hot country now, in their own words, quote unquote. They think Europe is weak. They feel like whatever Europe does is not going to impact them in a great way. I disagree with that, because if Europe actually says to the US, okay, we're going to respond, okay, you have a lot of debt to us, we're going to call in some of that debt. If the US bond market gets in trouble because of this European response, Trump will back down, in my view. That's what happened with his the day that he implemented all the tariffs. There was lots of issues with the US bond market because they owe a lot of debt to the rest of the world. Okay, so Europe has to realize its power. It's a huge market. They could say the bazooka solution for Europe, their policy in order to respond, they could say to US companies, you no longer have access to the European market. Now, this risks a trade war with the US, potentially, but I don't think that's in the US interest either. But you see, I think Europe's at a point they've got to call Donald Trump's bluff. If they don't, he'll get Greenland. And then what will he want next? Do you see what I mean? This going along with this modern day dictator like king who feels like he's got ultimate power in the world is not working.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, of course, I completely agree with that. Yeah, I think it's really disappointing to see because I think that the Trump administration is wrong when they say Europe is weak. I think they're acting weak. They're acting like weak actors who don't have any power to make a change, but they definitely have the capacity to do something if they so will it. I think it was one of the White House press conferences the other day, and a reporter did ask, look, is Europe weak? And yes, the response was, yes, they are incredibly weak and they don't have the power that it takes to beat America in this sense because they're off by themselves, these Americans. I think the ego tends to inflate a little bit when you don't have a room of people telling you what you could be improving on, right? Like you tend to believe that you're the smartest person in the room. So that's what the situation is. I think that what Mark Carney talked about in his speech yesterday in Davos pinpointed exactly what everyone's feeling right now. For the past few years, everyone's been thinking this is the rebellious stage of the US. It's a stage. We'll get through it, persevere, and you'll get past it. Just be nice to Trump while he's in power, and then eventually the next Democrat will be in charge, and hopefully all will be well. That is not the case. The nature of the whole Democratic Party, the Democrats in the US has completely changed. The nature of the international system has completely changed. It will never be the same once you disrespect a relationship like NATO. You can't go back because it was like he really intelligently spoke about in his speech. This relationship, yes, it was symbiotic, but often it favored the US far more than most other countries in the world, right? They were unchecked in their behavior wherever they went. They could send military forces into Iraq, they could send them into Afghanistan without anyone questioning the moral right and legal right of the US to do so. So now we're at a point where they've done a lot of shit wrong. Are we going to forgive them and move on? Are we going to understand this is who the US are as a whole? It is their identity, and we're going to have to shift to consider their unpredictability.
The really interesting thing is the state of European leadership. Macron is one of the strong leaders, but he's out of office in a year or so time. He's coming towards the end of his term. Starmer's in all sorts of trouble in the UK. In fact, Trump is just mocking him over the last day or so as a fool because, he gave away the Chagos Islands, and, is leasing it back at some.
Important to note, though, that Trump literally
He
last year, when the
agreed to
whole
it.
process was happening, because the US also had to give their permission to give back the Chagos Islands because they both have a military base there. The US said, yes, of course, that's an excellent idea. So this is not an example of Trump disagreeing with the UK's actions. This is an example of Trump deciding he wants to fight back in some way.
That's
So
true.
he picks a topical time to get mad at the UK about it, when in actuality he has already agreed.
Yeah, I agree, but I think I think the UK is playing by the old world order. Political norms, global standards, doing the right thing. But that world is finished at the moment, right? It doesn't exist at the moment. So the UK, I think, needs to adapt their strategy on, for example, Chagos Islands. And, if the US really wants it, sell it to them for an incredible amount of money, right? I mean, go along with this and you've got to adapt your strategy because Starmer's in all sorts of trouble in the UK. And of course, the opposition, Conservatives and Reform, are saying you're a fool, Starmer. You should never have done this. So
But they
whether
don't.
he'll do a reversal or not of this whole scenario.
The history of the Chagos Islands, this is a completely different topic, really, to what we were talking about. But just to go into it for a second, because you can't. Okay, the Chagos Islands, it is an area of Mauritius, yes? All the people who were native to the island and who lived there before the base were kicked out and relocated to a different area and were not given any say in the matter, right? So that was like quite a few thousand people. I think it was like 15,000 people or a number around that. A lot of them now live in the UK because they were given citizenship rights when that all happened. But now Mauritius is asking for these islands back. The UK considered, from a security perspective, it was the best thing to give all the islands back and then keep the island that they have their army base on. And when you're in a foreign territory, foreign region, it can be difficult if everyone around you isn't happy that you're there, right? So you want to do something that makes these nation states happy about your army base. And what you can do is by giving the islands back and then leasing it off them and saying, look, we respect your sovereignty to this land, but would we be able to keep our army base? Because that's all they really want. They don't need all the islands.
I get it, but what I'm saying in this new world order, power is strength. Okay, and the UK had certain power. They didn't really need to do it, right? They could have done it, could have, just said, we're going to continue with this and, piss off for the moment.
What I think Carney is saying is that this new world order being created by Trump where power is strength, he doesn't respect that as the new world order. So he's saying we all need to rise up as middle powers to override him. I don't think it's a good thing that power is strength. I think you do genuinely have to prove how beneficial it is to all of us to work together.
Oh, look, I agree. I don't disagree with Carney's speech. I thought it was a great speech, but it's beholden on these middle powers like Canada, like Japan, South Korea, Australia, etc., to get together and get on with this, right? To support the United Nations, because the other side of this coin, Trump's peace board, and this started off in terms of looking at Gaza, etc., but it's an attempt to replace the United Nations. This peace board, Trump would be the chairman of the peace board, not only whilst he's in power, but long-term in perpetuity. Okay? In order to go on the peace board, you've got to commit $1 billion of commitment to the cause, rebuilding Gaza, etc. And the ludicrousness of it is, he's invited Putin, Lukashenko of Belarus, and these people have accepted. Netanyahu's accepted. I mean, this is just the craziest thing ever. And, Macron has said he's not interested from a point of view of France. Albanese's been invited. But this is just a crazy scenario to try and replace the United Nations. Again, all the rest of the world, these middle powers, need to now stand up and say, we don't agree. If the US is so down on the UN, move the UN headquarters to Geneva and, establish a new world order with all the rest of the world and these middle powers being the democratic beacons of the world.
I completely agree. And taking exactly what my lovely father just said and bringing it back to the Chagos Islands, I don't think that we should be bending down and handing over an area that has had a completely successful deal made with the local nation and handing it over to Trump just to stop him from having a tantrum. I think that we all need to stand up as democratic middle powers and say that we're not going to bow down to everything he wants or says that he needs. I think that that is exactly what is the problem with the international system right now. The reason why great power is working is because everyone is too terrified to do anything against Trump. But it's like we the people, right?
It's true.
If enough countries stand up against what he's doing, if Nobel Peace Prize earners are not giving it away to him as a sign of respect, if everyone starts calling him out for his bullshit, how long can he keep the charade up?
That's true. And if the bond market comes under threat in the US, and I think it's really beholden on people like Friedrich Merz, the Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich, and Angela von der Leyen, to take leadership here, because, as I said, Macron's a great leader, but he's
Ursula von der Leyen,
Ursula von der Leyen coming towards the end of his term. Starmer's under all sorts of political pressure at home. Meloni from Italy is in a powerful position. You see Meloni and Merz and von der Leyen, I think, need to take the lead with support from the others and corral the Europeans to get to the point and say, okay, here's how we're going to respond, and to shock the Americans, because I think they're just drunk with power at the moment. And unless someone checks them, and you can say, here's what we're planning to do. You can have the execution of it after the midterms or after the Supreme Court decision. But I think the Americans will be shocked just by Europe saying, well, we don't agree. You've crossed the line and that's it.
Yeah, I also think that Trump and his administration have severely underestimated the American people themselves, right? A lot of them, I don't think, are MAGA extremists who voted for Trump. They're just ordinary people who were struggling and they wanted a chance to maybe make the economy a little bit better, and that's why they voted in that direction. Like, we're underestimating how much everything that's happening with ICE has affected the people in America, everything that's happening in the world order as a whole, and even just the price of daily goods of the grocery store has been going up massively and will only continue to go up massively. Like, the predictions are right, it's gonna double and triple in the next few years, let alone the small increases that we've seen so far. It could be the end of the American economy as a whole. This is no small thing that we're talking about. So I think that he's been playing a game, acting as a strong man. Everyone's been putting up with it so far. But when they're forced on an issue like Greenland, they're forced to step up, step back against him, say, no, I'm sorry, we can't let you do that. That will be when the dice fall, and that will be when he realizes his position, because people won't keep putting up with this shit once he crosses that line.
It could well be, this is typical Trump negotiating tactics as well. He asks for 100% and then he's happy with 40%. So it could be an agreement for the Europeans to put more military forces into Greenland and the US to open more bases, etc. There could be some compromise that comes out of this, but I think that would come out of a scenario where the Europeans push back strongly. I hope they have the willingness to do that, because this has all sorts of implications for Ukraine and other issues in the world. And, Putin must be rubbing his hands together because the Russians have always wanted the destruction of NATO. This would be the best thing ever for them. So it will be fascinating over the next day or so to see how it all turns out. One of the more interesting political nuances in the last 50 years, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. You can call it interesting, you can call it a lot of things. You can call it heartbreaking somewhat, right? Because we've believed in this facade, in this made up thing, right? Even the UN, it's a made up thing. It's something we believe in, and that's how it gets its power. It's not from any real world, practical, legal foundations, because it's an international organization. That's how it runs. So we've believed in this fairy tale of working cooperatively, working symbiotically, having trade routes, having trade relationships, and respecting each other's sovereignty. And now the US, as our strongest power and the strongest proponent of those very ideas and values, has now turned around and attempted to destroy all of them, because it seems they got a bit too egotistic. So I honestly think it's quite a sad time, because we had a very precarious peace that was balancing, and now that will no longer be possible. And it will be really difficult to see what the world and the international community will look like in the next few years. I don't think anyone can predict it. And yeah, I guess that's where.
I feel a little more positive than you. I don't know why. I have faith that,
In what?
well, that people like Carney and people like the Europeans eventually will realize their power and they'll stand up and things will normalize somewhat, I think, going forward. That's my view. Anyway, meanwhile, in Australia, Australians are worried about getting into the water because there's been 4 shark attacks in the last 4 days. Tragically, a 12-year-old boy is unexpected to survive. He's swimming at Nielsen Park, which you wouldn't think would be that dangerous from a shark point of view. So it seems to me we need to think about culling some of these sharks, even though the green lobby would say that's atrocious. But, when 4 shark attacks in 4 days, it's pretty bad.
Look, I think this it's probably a good place to end this podcast, I would say, for today. We've discussed a lot of topics from the New World Order to the culling of sharks in the Sydney and Australian waters. So look, we'll see what happens with that. That's just an unfortunate natural situation that's happening in Australia at the moment, but it is something that's taking up a lot of people's minds. And I would say it kind of reminds you of what really matters, right? We face enough danger just when we look at climate change, natural disasters, when we go into the ocean and face to face with a predator. Why do we need to face the danger of politics as well? Why can't we make that a bit simpler for ourselves? But I would say that's a good time to end this
Perfect.
podcast.
Well, thank you for listening, and we will be back in 2 weeks' time with another episode of Dadsplaining Politics.
We will be.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Bye.